Hi everyone, my name is Zain Nayani. I'm the founder and CEO of Zain Advisory. We are an implementation specialist company, and we provide services exclusively to Indigenous communities. Today, I want to talk about this really interesting topic. Put it as a question mark, where the money is coming from, how do you fund projects that don't have committed funding? How did I come up with this topic? I presented this at a recent conference, and I did that because I come across this dilemma all the time. And when I'm working with communities, they've got, these really cool projects identified in their community plans, but they never actually get built because there was a funding gap. There was not enough money to fund that project, or the grant didn't show up. In doing so, you don't end up getting a project that is so critically important for the community that it never gets built because, well, the money aspect wasn't really looked after. So with that intent, talk about let me move the slide here. But just in terms of what's the objective for this conversation, it's really talking about the importance of financial planning because that's the key word here, financial planning. When do you start doing that? It's part of you've identified a project. Well, at that point, start thinking about how you're going to fund that project, right? So that's what we're going to talk about as we dive into it. But I guess as I was thinking about this conversation, this particular conversation, I said this whole presentation is a bit of a recap of an event that I was just part of. And that was a very specific audience. But I feel like this conversation is equally valid to people who are following us on digital media, people out there working in the same Indigenous space as we are. If you are part of that space, this presentation should be helpful to you. And that's what I've kind of kept in mind as I was thinking about it, because at the end of the day, well, there's so much value in the work we all do. The word funding uncertainty. Think about how we can relate to this, right? You've got a project identified as part of comprehensive community planning process. You go after getting some grants, takes a bit of a time to get the grants. They may get approved, they may not get approved. And even if they get approved, well, there might be other challenges that kind of pushes the project forward and forward and forward. So in that case, you become a bit uncertain. You may get to a place where you don't have a project to execute, or it's just too late. It become too pricey. And as a result of all of that, you don't really get a project that was identified as part of a community plan. So what can you do about it? When we think about, well, the word funding uncertainty, I'm calling it the three A's. One, you acknowledge the need, right? Why is it important to plan for the finances? If you are planning for finances, what kind of finances should we be looking at? Then the second A, aim for a diversified strategy. So what kind of finances are we looking for? Well, diversify, right? And we'll talk a little bit about it here in detail. So that's the second A. Acknowledge the need, aim for a diversified funding strategy, and apply practical implementation tools. So, actually writing down the financial plan, really keeping it simple, doing some budgeting, forecasting around it, doing some monitoring, controlling, reporting around all of that. Look at this in simple three-step, three A's framework. Well, you're able to feel a bit more confident with respect to the financial plan of the project that you're working towards. Just dive into each of these three A's. The very first thing, when we think about acknowledging the need, it's about identifying that there is a gap, right? There's a gap with respect to financial planning. The how part, the what part, I've kind of laid it all down, but what I want to focus on as part of this conversation is it's really the why, right? Why is it important to know or understand or have a financial plan? That's the very first step. But the simple answer is if you don't know, where you want to go, how are you going to get to that place, right? And that's just it, right? With respect to financial plan as well. Well, a financial plan gives you the ability to understand, where you're at, where you need to go, how you're going to get there. And all in respect to money, all in respect to finances. If you don't answer those questions, well, you're never going to get there, right? And that's just it. So once you've figured that part out, once you've given high importance to this concept of financial planning and you treat it as a real thing, the next thing with respect to project financing is to figure out the different funding sources that exist out there, and not talking about really going after everything that's out there. That's a waste of time. Don't do that. But really identifying, targeting certain funding pots, whether they're in-house, whether they're external to you, that would be really, really valuable with respect to your project. Just identify them. Have a simple list, put someone to work to say, hey, would we qualify for this particular project? Would we not qualify for this project? So just really start thinking about that early on, and keeping it diverse always helps because the risk is now divided, right? The risk is now divided, and you've got more supporters in terms of funders who are wanting to be part of this project. So more people associated to you, more means more success, more tangible, intangible benefits, all of that. So we keep that in mind, when you're thinking about project financing. I mean, thinking about, having a diversified funding strategy, diversified financing strategy. The number one thing that comes to mind is, in our space, we kind of call it OSR, own source revenues. And all that is, our own monies, right? And when I say our, well, I'm thinking about my clients for most part, who are Indigenous governments, bands, councils, nonprofits. Then they think about own source revenue. So what are the monies that they're generating through their own resources, right? So they've got clean energy projects, forestry projects, taxation, whatever that may be, money that is their own. And this is a critically important piece of the puzzle, because this is the part that creates this really good feeling, because it's our money, right? It promotes that concept of self-determination, self-government, and that's really, really important. And this type of money often comes in early planning stages of a project, right? When I say projects, well, it could be a capital project, something like a housing. It could be an operation project, something like an educational program, a summer youth employment program, something like that. Regardless of the type of projects it is, OSR, owns those revenues, are amazing to get funding for the pre-planning part of a project, right? Like, this is the part that comes before the development stage of any type of project. But just when you're thinking about, getting started, you've identified a need, you've acknowledged that a financial plan is needed, you've identified the bunch of funding sources. The first thing you want to do is look at how much money can you spare towards this particular project. And the best use of that is early stages, writing up a proposal, submitting it to the funders to get the major chunk of money. And that's where, if you do that first bit, you sponsor someone to write a grant for you. This is where the second type of funding comes in, grants. And these could be a variety of things. Again, you've got plenty of federal grants out there, plenty of provincial grants out there, even foundations like Vancouver Foundation, Victoria Foundation. There's just so many great organizations, whether it's government or not, that are out there wanting to support our projects. So let's do it. Why? Well, again, grants, it's free money, right? It's free money in exchange of a great project. So it's about connecting the dots, right? And it really helps build successful projects if you've got different types of grants. And I'll give you an example of the first two cases here. We had this community building housing project with them early on, like back in 2018. We started thinking about, well, how do we want to do this thing? The community came together, said, well, let's set some money aside. We'll put together a bit of a proposal for a major housing funder out there, and this was a provincial funder. They invested their own source monies towards the cost of writing a bit of an awesome proposal that went into this provincial funding body. And in a few months' time, the province came back saying, well, hey, we love the concept that you've laid out. We'd love to be part of this project. In fact, we'll work with our federal partners, we'll work with our other partners to get you more funding and make this project really, really successful. So by investing own source revenues, it opens up more doors, because now the grants, the funders out there are seeing, equity built into your project. Your own money plays a critical role. So that's grants. And then the other thing that comes to mind with respect to a funding strategy is partnerships and collaborations. And this is great. Like, you've got so many local not-for-profits, so many local for-profit organizations in practically everywhere, right? In your region. So why not work with them to really benefit your particular project? And just as an example, for the same housing project, well, we had this beautiful housing project and a common building as part of this housing project, had some renewable energy stuff associated to this project too. But this common building was for community that was being created as part of the housing project to use as part of just getting together, having movie nights, having the laundry, the dryers and the washers, all that kind of thing, a commercial kitchen in this common building. But that common space was also great opportunity for a local daycare, a local assisted living facility to create some of their programming for the community. Because oftentimes when you think about it, in our part of the world, we miss out those two layers, right? Particularly when we're doing big, high density housing projects, well, care for the young, care for the elderly, that needs to be part of the housing. So why not? And we can't do that as a project, right? There are other nonprofits, for profits out there, social enterprises who could. So why not we partner with them? Why not bring them in to create a more long-lasting kind of an operations plan, make them part of that, because that side of the project also needs financing, right? So think about it. Then the next thing that comes to mind is the fundraising aspects. And again, with fundraising, it's also, individual donors, but also corporate donors, right? People in communities often celebrate, passing of seasons, right? Like winter gatherings, summer gatherings, spring gatherings, fall gatherings. You could fund these gatherings using your own source, or you can give people a bit of an ownership. People, when I say people, well, people as in community members, but also people as in, corporations that are working in your territories, in your communities, like railways, hydro, telecom, all these big corporations that are, using right of ways to pass through communities. Well, why not they want to do it. So why not engage them for local, small scale projects, initiatives, whether it's social, whether it's economic development, involve them into that conversation, get them to be part of your project, right? Like they'd love to be part of the project, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So fundraising, again, another critical way to raise monies. And then last but not least, financial institutions. In fact, I often think that this is like next to own source revenues. These guys, banks, should be standing there because they do offer a lot of capital, right? And that's very much needed, especially if you're building out a bigger project like a housing capital project. You need financing for that. If you don't have grant, but the need still exists, well, that's the only way to build it, right? And always when we think about debt and equity, your own source money is, well, debt. Bank's money, equity is a bit pricier than the debt. So why not? Why not use debt to achieve your community's visions? And having the right banker on your side is super important. So involve them. Involve them in your community planning process, involve them in your project planning process, keep them, next to you, talk to them regularly to make sure that they understand your project and are able to support your project in case you can't figure out grants, in case you can't get partnerships, in case you can't get fundraising done. Well, the banks are there, they are in the business of giving money. Why wouldn't they? But you want to make sure that they're giving you money that is low interest rate, right? That kind of thing, no service fee. So you want to make sure all those things. So you want to talk to them early on, and it doesn't hurt to get those conversations. It doesn't even hurt to have multiple banking partners to make sure that you build your project in the best possible way. So keep them in mind. Now, those were, I guess, the second day, right? Aiming for a diversified strategy. Now you're looking at the tools, what kind of tools exist. The very first thing you want to do when it comes to tools is to actually write down your financial plan, right? Codify it. Where are you at with respect to, in this case, we're talking about project finances. Where are you with respect to your project finances? Where do you want to go with respect to your project finances? How are you going to get to with respect to your project financing? So really answering those, what do we call it, W's and the H's, just really answer those questions with respect to the financing of your project. And that is the simplest way to answer this little thing called financial plan. It doesn't have to be complicated. Once you've done that, keep that in mind and start thinking about the budgets, the forecast, the estimates. Why is that important? Well, it creates a bit of a yardstick. It doesn't have to be rigid, but it needs to be flexible. But really keep in mind that it provides a bit of a framework for you to control the cost of doing your project, right? And I'll just quickly give you an example here for the same housing project. Well, we developed a financial plan, answered those W's and those H's, and arrived after doing all this development planning work, arrived at firm budget for the project. And that's it. Like that, really working with consultants, engineers, builders, different people involved in executing the plan that was at play to come up with a number that made sense to all parties. And then that became a bit of a yardstick for us to say, hey, we can't go past this. It'd be great to build it under, but we want to make sure that we build the thing that we've kind of talked about. So really working with your team to create something that is practical. And a budget is a great way to do that, but not just creating a budget, obviously you have to monitor it, right? You create a budget, start thinking about looking at it on a regular basis. As soon as the project starts, well, maybe a monthly team meeting, just bring out the budget. This is how we're doing with respect to our project. We are high on this particular line item, low on this particular line item. Ask the tough questions about, why. Why are we high? Why are we low? What can we do about it? And that's this opportunity. Why is this step important? Is because it creates that transparency, that accountability that's very much needed with respect to delivering of a project. And it's important, I guess, again, because if you're working in a community setting, well, people want transparency. People want to know how much money is being utilized to build a certain project, to execute a certain project, where the money's coming from, what impact it will have on other things that are also equal needs for this community. So again, it's important to have these conversations and not shy away from it if we really want a truly collaborative and successful project. So I'm hoping that this kind of conversation gives people who are watching this some confidence. But if you're still feeling less confident, in a bit of a less confident place when you're dealing with funding uncertainty, think about the 3 A's, right? Acknowledging the need by understanding why it's important to plan finances, looking at identifying different funding sources, diversified funding sources, and then aiming for those diversified fundings, particularly the own source revenues. You've got grants, you've got partnerships, fundraisers, and then last but not the least, financial institutions. And the last thing that comes to mind with respect to how do you feel confident about this concept of funding uncertainty, apply practical tools. And then the number one tool there is to actually codify a financial plan. It's simple as a one pager, but somewhere where you can fall back on, have budgets, have forecasts, and monitor them, report on them. So remember the 3 A's. Final thoughts? Well, what's on the screen? You can read it. So I'm not going to repeat that. But I think what I'd like to say is this weird stigma around money, right? And the only way to deal with it, even in relation to projects, is to simply ask questions, right? Ask questions about things like, well, where's the money coming from? Where's the money going to go to? And as long as we kind of answer those questions, we're able to plan a successful project, and not just a project that's going to be started successfully, but a project that is, pre-planned, developed, executed successfully, but can also operate successfully, because that's another critical component of projects, is to make sure that it runs through the entire life cycle. And it doesn't matter, again, it doesn't matter if it's a capital project, if it's an operational project, it doesn't really matter. As long as we are able to plan the full life cycle of a project in terms of money, we've done the job, right? And the only way to do it is, well, asking the questions. So don't worry about the stigma, ask the questions, have a team, come up with a plan, and just trust in that team in that plan and in the process, and it'll work out. So that's all for us today. If you need help with respect to implementation, this is where you can find us.